Hey everybody, welcome back. This is DS Yvonne at reprogrammingmind.com. And today I'd like to share with you some insights from a person who's helped change more lives for the better than anyone else. And I think he's at least in the top 10 people for being able to create those kinds of positive transformations. Now, the person I'm talking about here is Dr. Richard Bandler, who is the co-founder and co-creator of NeuroLinguistic programming. Now, he's trained over 100,000 people with this skill set, including myself and Tony Robbins and, well, hey, 100,000 more. Now, if you'd like to find out what neurolinguistic programming is, well, we get to hear it straight from Dr. Richard Bandler himself. So tell us, what is neurolinguistic programming?
Neurolinguistic programming is the study of successful behaviors. And I don't just mean the external behavior, I mean the internal behaviors, the thought patterns that produce that success. So instead of identifying what's pathological and not pathological and what caused something historically, like a psychologist, we go in and build models. That is just a description of how somebody is thinking and acting that produces a successful result. And we take it from one person and we teach another person to do it. So if somebody has where psychologists studied people that had fears, and they put them in support groups together. So everybody who was afraid of snakes met together and talked about how terrible snakes were. And everybody who had sexual addiction got in the same room and talked about how horrible your sexual addiction is. What we did is found people who got over those problems without any kind of therapy or any kind of talking, found out what somebody does naturally that made it a natural and quick transition, found out what occurred at that time, and then built a model of it by which we could teach someone else to think that way. So when I worked in schools, there was a kid who couldn't spell, and therefore he was learning disabled because he couldn't read and he didn't this. I went out and found somebody who could win spelling bees, found out that they were making pictures of the word and then blowing them up so they were big, and then knowing which is the right picture, and then they look down and make sure it matched the little one on the paper, and then you could say any word and they'd make the picture and they'd copy it down. Teach the kid to do the same thing, and suddenly he's not just spelling at the second grade level, he could spell at the 5th grade level or the 7th grade level, because it doesn't matter what word it is, it's still just one picture. And as long as we know it's a remembered picture, that means they can read it forwards and backwards. The letters look exactly the same. It's not something they're making up. Because if every time somebody says, how do you spell a word? If you make it up every time, you're going to be wrong sometimes. Whereas if you have one remembered picture and you put it up, it will be correct. NLP is the study of successful strategies.
Terrific. Now I'm wondering, how can you help change people's minds to improve their lives for the better by using NLP?
The answer to that is almost limitless. NLP is, by the way, not what transforms them. It's the person using it that transforms them. Some people are better at it. Some people are better at dentistry than other people. If you're asking what happens when I use it, I can answer that question. And when I use it, if people come in and they tell me they have a fear of going up escalators, I have two jobs. One is to make it so that they can ride up and down escalators without having to worry about it. And the other is to make sure that it doesn't interfere with anything that they do well already, so that by changing something in their mind, it doesn't pay a price on the other side. And also to make sure that they have the ability to overcome any fear. Because I'm not doing something to them. NLP isn't where you do something to somebody. It's where you teach people how to think on purpose.
Right. Now, can a person use NLP on themselves?
Absolutely. In many cases, however, it's better to have somebody help you, because the way in which you make decisions may be what's creating your difficulty. And therefore, if you try to decide about your own deciding, you can get in trouble. But there are lots of things in NLP that people can use. There are lots of good strategies that people can learn. We've modeled everything from successful athletes. We've modeled successful spelling strategies, learning strategies, multiplying strategies, writing strategies. And, it depends upon who's teaching you. If you're going to learn by yourself, you have to have some foundation to use NLP for yourself. And I don't believe the books describe even a fraction of what we found. So you have to have some way. I mean, you can use it in the sense that if you want to do something better, you could go out and get a strategy from somebody about how they do it. And you could go into a deep trance and put it in yourself. But there are a lot of things that you can do better by using NLP. But it's not really designed as a form of self-exploration. Even asking that question sounds like something a psychologist would say, because psychologists are into self-analysis. That's not really what NLP is about. NLP is about adjusting your neurology. It functions at the neurological level. Your neural synapses, be they ever so microscopic, grow neurocortical pathways that result in learnings that will be there for the rest of your life. And the way you learn new things is by putting neural synapses over them and by disengaging the old ones. They're still there. You don't forget that they're there. They just don't operate by themselves. And every time you refine motor movements, every time you think clearer about something, remember things, the way in which you change that is related to how your neurology functions. And it's not that you understand yourself better. It's not that you use NLP on yourself. It's not self-exploration. This is about taking control of your neurology and being able to think the way you want. And the most important thing about that is that if you change the way you think, it will change the way you feel, and therefore it will change what you're capable of doing.
So speaking of capabilities, what do you mean when you say that if you are not expanding, that you are not using NLP?
By expansion, I mean expanding the range of things you're capable of doing, the speed with which you can do them. So to me, that if you say I'm doing NLP and you're not learning new skills and eliciting new strategies from people and finding out how to do things easier, quicker, faster, and designing ways to think better, you're not really doing NLP. You're just using NLP techniques. That's what I meant by that comment.
And how have you helped salespeople and entrepreneurs to improve their performance?
I teach them to be more efficient with the use of their time. The real currency of life is how you spend the moments that you have. And years ago, somebody from Harvard Alumni Association sent out a thing to all kinds of business people and said, what would you need to become much more successful? And the largest answer they got, the largest number of people said an extra hour a day. Well, if you think of the amount of time that's wasted making decisions, getting motivated, going through decisions over and over again, giving people instructions and having to give them to them over again, what NeuroLinguistic programming offers is a set of skills by which you can teach people to be able to hear better, to remember better, to function better. We spend tremendous amount of time training salesmen to be better at what they do without teaching them how to be motivated enough to do it. You can teach people everything about sales, but if they don't pick up the telephone and make the call, it doesn't do any good. We have to teach people that that their problems aren't a result of some reality. They're the result of how they're thinking about it. Their skill, even when their skill is good, doesn't mean it can't be better, faster, and therefore more efficient. If those set of moments you spend every day are more aimed at successful, if more of the decisions you make are good ones instead of bad ones, because there's a real difference between the machine that makes good ones and bad ones, and when you understand that, then you make more good decisions, and therefore you have less regrets, you make more money. And to me, that this is, if you improve the quality of life, how you spend the moments of your time, and that's done by thinking on purpose instead of thinking randomly or thinking as a mode of reaction, having choice.
Makes sense. Now, what are the benefits of teaching NLP to teachers and the educational system in general?
Again, that depends upon who's teaching them. When you ask what are the benefits, that depends upon who's doing it. Kate Benson, who wrote this book with me over a period of some 10 years now, we took a lot of time and tested everything in it. Kate has trained people to train teachers and trained teachers themselves for a long time. I've gone in and worked with, quote, educationally handicapped kids in school where they told me these kids couldn't learn and they had lots of reasons and names for it. But again, I'm going, what is it they're not able to do? Finding people who can do it and teaching them how to do it. Teachers are now expected to spend more and more time being an administrator. There's, I know in this country, it's out of hand, the amount of things the government lays on them and the amount of things the administrators lay on them that's supposed to be accountability. But what it really is a distraction from what's important. The training of teachers does not provide them the how to teach. It only provides them what to teach. Make a lesson plan. These are the words kids are supposed to know. And they try as hard as they can to get all these kids to do it. And the ones that slip through the cracks are diagnosed as having learning disabilities, being ADHD, or just being stupid, or being rebellious, or whatever it is. They're categorized off. So either they're allowed to fail. And, a lot of this started because some kid said, came in and said to his mother, in my presence, my teacher failed me. And, they were holding a test with an F on it. And that ambiguity in English, it may not work in other languages, but in English it sure does. The teacher failing you means that the teacher wasn't equipped to teach you how to pass this test. And, they say that a smaller classroom would help, but what would really help is a technology that told the teacher exactly what to do with this kid when something doesn't work, so that they can teach. And if 70% get it, then they have tools to look at the other 30%. And maybe even better tools to start out so they don't get 70%. And what we try to provide in this book are really concrete examples. And in fact, somebody who's famous in the field of education would not write something about the book because they said it was too curriculum oriented, because instead of focusing on letting kids dance naked in the streets and find out, their passion in life, what it did was it said, look, it's easy to learn to read, write, and do arithmetic and math and creative writing and sports and all of these things if you think this way. And if you teach them all of those things, then go let them find their passion. And I'm sorry, but our school systems insist that teachers teach these things. If I can make it so that's easy, then there'll be a lot of spare time left over for kids to decide what they want to do in life. And I don't believe really elementary schools is where kids decide to be a doctor or an artist, or an entrepreneur. I know I changed my mind a few times. I think I wanted to be a fireman, and you couldn't have gotten me to be a fireman later in life. That's too dangerous of a job for me. Those guys have tremendous bravery, and I'm not one of them. But, what a 5-year-old and a 10-year-old thinks they're going to do. I had no idea I'd be doing this my whole life, even when I was in college. I thought this was going to be a short project on the side. The book Teaching Excellence has just been released, and we make the mass release worldwide and translate it into other languages. What I'm hoping is it finds its way into the hands of teachers and relieves the burden on them, makes it so that teaching becomes more fun again, and it becomes more fun for them, more fun for the students, so that they can get kids to learn all of the words, and not just the second grade words, but any word they look at should go into a machine and become something they can spell. And math should pour out of them, and geometry should pour out of them. And if it's put in the right way, it will. And it's the job of school districts to decide what lessons need to be taught. It's my job to give a teacher an easier way to get it taught. And that's what the book is about. And I believe Kate and I have done a lot to help teachers to be able to deal with their problems at school, problem, quote, kids, but they're not really problem kids. Not really.
Heard you talking about being able to get kids to become smarter. So I'm just wondering, what do you mean by having kids get smarter?
Well, kids are taught in school a lot of stuff. We define a smart kid as kids that can answer questions on tests. But kids not only have to learn to, when presidents were born and died, and that 2 + 2 is 4, they have to learn how to solve problems. So we live in a world where everything is changing geometrically compared to when I grew up. Kids are going to have to learn new stuff constantly. And so they're going to have to look at a problem and be able to figure out how to do it. And most of the real innovations in science and innovations that occur in manufacturing and innovations that occur that make things better come from people that are problem solvers. They're not people that evaluate things and memorize facts. They go against what people believe is possible and impossible. The only reason scientists that were able to take less technology than is in your cell phone and be able to get a man to the moon and back was because they had powerful beliefs, and they got together great skills and solved problems. They had people that solved the problems of getting off the planet and problems of getting back. A lot of that was very sophisticated and very high-tech math. It had to build new materials. They had to build things so that weighed less. They approached every problem, no matter how many hundreds of thousands of problems it was, only looking for solutions. We need to look at kids. They go to school now, and everything they do from the time they enter to the time you graduate college, every mistake you make is marked off in red. They don't really very rarely mark off the good stuff you do. They mark off every word that's misspelled, every math problem that's wrong. We get people to look for what's wrong so that, the question about whether you get an A or you get an F, that's not the thing. To me, that's not the important part. It's how well you did on the curve. The part is how well are you going to do in life? And, you're going to have to come up with solving problems your entire life. Financial problems, relationship problems, employment problems. They're going to be problems with your furnace. And you have to know how to get the right people to do the right thing. So we have to start teaching people how to think, and then we can teach them what to think.
What advice would you give to someone who's looking to improve their ability to learn?
Well, that wouldn't be something I would answer in a paragraph. That would depend upon the person. And the question is to learn what, to do what, because a lot of what people ask me, I don't necessarily think would be the best thing for them. To me, the question is, what do they want to accomplish? That's a very grandiose question. And I'm not the kind that answers those. The reason I do well with clients is I find out what they want and what they think they need. And sometimes I modify it a little bit because I think they can do better. To me, how do you teach people to optimize things? Is to move away from what doesn't work. People do something, they yell at their kids and it doesn't help, and they do the same thing over and over again. Einstein defined insanity as doing the same thing and expecting a different result. And yet we do it with everything. Drug reinforcement is unbelievable. They've been fighting the same battle, and they're not cutting any hunger. They spent billions of dollars, and what they're doing just simply doesn't seem to be working. There's got to be problem solvers that go at this in a new way before any big problem or small problem is going to be solved. You got to get to the point where when your reaction is to do something and it's not going to work, that's when you have to be able to feel different. In order to feel different, you got to back up and think different. Change the way you think changes the way you feel. Therefore, it will change what you're actually capable of accomplishing.
What would you suggest to have a better system for organizing thoughts?
I'm sorry, how do we organize our thoughts? Some people not very well, some people better. But the conscious part of it, we do through pictures, feelings, sounds. What people call feelings are primarily the way in which their antennic nervous system is operating. We feel things, and sometimes we move those. All of our hollow and solid organs send signals up through our brain. We have a kinesthetic cortex and a visual cortex and an auditory cortex. And the olfactory system has direct cortical projections, but you can imagine tastes and imagine smells. And there's a difference between what you think and what you see and hear and feel from the outside. Knowing the difference between external things and how we represent them to ourselves consciously. One is a map, the other is the territory. And we unconsciously then process all that neurologically. And we know more and more about that all the time. There are now greater and greater devices to look at what goes on in the brain when people are engaged in one activity. We know more about what areas of the brain are doing things. and they're having greater and greater ability to look down at what brain cells and how they function and what things like oxytocin and serotonin and all these neurochemicals are. But if you change the way you think and you change the way you feel, it changes those things as well. It's not something that goes in one direction. It's not cause effect. All of these things are operating at the same time in an infinitely complex but very balanced system. It's a real miracle. And anything we can do to influence our nervous system to function in an efficient, pleasant way, to go in the right direction, is a good thing. When you say, how do we organize our thoughts? Well, the question is, whom and to do what? It's a very specific question.
I've read how a lot of doctors and psychologists would end up sending you the problem patients, people that they just weren't able to do anything with, no matter what kind of strategic intervention was involved. So I'm curious to find out, what were you doing that was enabling those problem patients to be able to find that cure or that solution?
Something else. See, when people came and they sent me a client, I looked at the file as only one thing, a list of the things people had tried, and not that they didn't have good intentions, whether they gave them medication, whether they gave them vitamins, whether they had them yell at empty furniture, all of these things they did not produce the desired result. Whether they locked them in the mental hospital and drugged them full of drugs and shocked them until they were blue in the face, they were still talking about being Jesus Christ, and then it just didn't work. So these are the things I'm not going to try. So to me, what I did was I would find out how, the answer to the question is, how do you know when the person's better, right? And sometimes I'd ask the family, I'd ask the doctor, because the person themselves wasn't giving me anything. I mean, I had some people that were so far into gibberish stuff that it was ridiculous, that they weren't making any sense. I mean, you really can't ask people in a delusional state or a person in a semi-catatonic state, what would you like for yourself today? But sometimes you can ask their wife, who will tell you it's something simple as, I want a man like my husband back. And I would go, well, there's two ways to get one. One, nowadays you could go online and hunt for one. And the other is to get him to stop what he's ever doing. And if a doctor says to me, he had a nervous breakdown and now he's, going through all this stuff, and they can't tell you which nerve broke, that's just not a good description. I have to create an experience which will get him back into the state of consciousness by which he thinks like the person he was, at least more than he is now. And, Milton, I always appreciated his work because he placed a real high value on the client getting out of the hospital, going home, getting married, having kids. I believe the last one was sending him presents. But to me, it's really important that, with people in psychological stuff, that I get them to change their state of consciousness so that they can make decisions about what to do with their life. That's not really my job.
And what would you say about the topic of NLP for changing bad memories?
Well, I don't change them into other bad memories. I don't really change the memory. I use a technique in neurolinguistic programming to make it so that bad memories don't dominate someone's thoughts. It's not that you don't remember that it happened, it's that it doesn't make you feel so bad anymore. It becomes just one of another memories. You still know it happened. And it's a very neurologically based technique. It's not something that really has anything to do with why or whatever. And you simply make changes inside of the memory itself at a very high speed so that it affects the neurology and takes the charge out of it so it doesn't fire off by itself all the time. And it just becomes one of all the other memories you have that you don't think about that much.
And what is the secret to happiness?
Well, The Secret of Happiness is the title of one of my books. And it relates to neurology in that that's how you get to be happy, is your neurology releases the right set of signals that create things, that create the perfect chemical imbalance and the perfect state of consciousness, so that you can go through all the states of consciousness which are labeled happiness. Because it's not really a thing. Really, the truth is, when people say they want to be happy, well, unless they're in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, that's not going to happen. That one happily goes to the store, one happily talks to their children. It's an adverb, so it has to be it has to be state-driven. And what I did was and the book, I went out and modeled people who had been through very horrible things, but were quite happy, to find out how people, because some people would go, I even did people in concentration camps that had been through the Holocaust. Some of them came out and were still, many years later, doing therapy and whining about it and feeling horrible. And some of them were so productive and leading such good lives, I wanted to know the difference between them. And as it turned out, that the people that are the happiness isn't just because you're running through a field, dancing naked and singing. That's not what happiness is. It turns out then when people have a purpose in mind, the people that survived prison in Vietnam, the people that survived concentration camps, always thought in their mind, I'm going to be somewhere and this is what I'm going to do. One of the guys that was told me about when he was in prison in Vietnam, he remembered his farm, his father's farm, and he was going to go back to his father's farm, and he would literally plow the ground row by row in his mind. He sat in a little box for 8 years and did that, and when he got back, he went back and became a successful farmer. But he didn't relive all of the experiences of being tortured because he spent his time there thinking about where he was going. Another guy had a haberdashery or something, or a clothing store in New York. And he decided, he was never going back to wherever he came from in Poland or something, and that he was going to get to New York somehow, and he was going to continue. His father had been a tailor, and he was going to go and open up a tailoring business, and he imagined having a family, and there was a purpose to surviving. And so when he got out, instead of thinking backwards, he thought forwards. And there seems to be a whole list of these things that constitutes that the happiest people, they have a purpose in life, they have friends, there are a whole list of them. And when we wrote the book, Garner Thompson, myself, part of it was because at the time it was a novel idea, because they used to say stress could cause illness, but they never looked at it the obvious way, that if you became a more cheerful person, your health would be better. And as it turned out, since I've been saying this for 40 years, that over the 40 years, they've now done research to prove it. So we actually included the research in the book so that if anybody needs to know that there's a reason to be happy, and because it will make you healthier, and that if you teach your children to be happier people, and that doesn't mean you're happy for no reason. In fact, quite the contrary. You're somebody that knows how to make a plan and how to follow a plan and how to make friends and all the things that cheerful people have in their life. And to me, the secret of being happy is knowing how to be more cheerful, more hours of the day than not.
Thank you, Dr. Richard Bandler, and thanks to all of you for sticking around all the way to the end. I hope you got value out of this. And if you'd like more, please subscribe. And I'll also leave a link down below for all of Dr. Richard Bandler's books. And I look forward to sharing more with you in the future. This is DS Yvonne at reprogrammingmind.com. Bye for now.